While I'm on vacation this summer, I thought I'd take the opportunity to expose my listeners to some of the other podcasts I've been on as a guest. I hope you enjoy this episode of The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard, which Lisa has graciously agreed to let me borrow. The episode is called Practical Strategies for Supporting Parents in Gender Distress Cases with Stephanie Winn, LMFT. It was originally released on Lisa's show on December 4th, 2024. If you're a therapist, you can earn continuing education contact hours with Lisa's NBCC-approved pod courses. Right now, Lisa is offering my listeners an incredible deal. Get all 27 pod courses for only $44. That could meet almost all of your continuing education needs for the year. Visit lisamustard.com/podcourses and use code SOMETHERAPIST to take $5 off of the $49 pod course bundle. Again, use code SOMETHERAPIST at lisamustard.com/podcourses. I will also include that link and coupon in the show notes for your convenience. All right, now here's on to my episode with Lisa.
You must be some kind of therapist.
This episode is brought to you by Young Sidekick, an innovative, secure, and 100% HIPAA-compliant AI solution designed for therapists. It cuts the time spent on progress notes by 10x, helping you stay more present during sessions while providing insightful analytics to elevate the quality of care. And you can get an exclusive 20% off your first purchase with promo code LISA20 at checkout at youngsidekick.com. That's young, Y-U-N-G sidekick.com, or just click the link in the show notes. Welcome to The Therapy Show. I'm Lisa Mustard, your host and guide on this journey of learning and professional growth. Here, we transform the way you earn continuing education contact hours. Whether you're on a walk, on a break in between sessions, commuting, or even preparing dinner, you can engage with cutting-edge insights from leading subject matter experts. Each episode features conversations with seasoned professionals who share effective techniques and tools tailored for busy therapists like you. Our goal is to enrich your practice and fit seamlessly into your active life, ensuring you stay informed and inspired without the hassle of traditional methods. You can say goodbye to sitting in front of a computer screen watching hours and hours of recorded trainings. Instead, we make continuing education as easy and accessible as your favorite podcast. So make sure to visit the website lisamustard.com to sign up for our continuing education membership. It's a fantastic way to earn your credits while enjoying the podcast. Join us on The Therapy Show, where your professional development continues wherever you are. Well, hey friends, welcome back to another episode of The Therapy Show. I'm your host, Lisa Mustard, and this week's guest is Stephanie Winn. Welcome to the podcast, Stephanie. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks, Lisa. It's great to be here.
I am so thrilled to have you. I've been wanting to have you on the podcast forever. Been listening to your show for months now, and I just get so much out of it. So can you share with our listeners a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you help?
Sure. My career has taken many forms over the years. I had no idea when I began grad school that I could have ended up here. So I went to grad school for counseling psychology in California between 2010 and 2013 and got my license as a marriage and family therapist in the process of moving from California to Oregon. So I worked in both states. I've worked in residential and high acuity foster youth and also more traditional marriage and family therapy, as well as individual therapy, worked with adolescents, worked in group practice, and eventually went into private practice. And during the course of my career, through all of those different positions, I witnessed this exponential rise in the number of youth presenting with gender-related concerns. And I, like many therapists, was initially taught the sort of so-called affirmation model. In retrospect, I'm thankful that I never went on to the next degree of training where I would have been taught to actually write these letters that recommend surgical and hormonal interventions for people according to the WPATH so-called standards of care. I'm glad I didn't do that, but I did participate in the affirmation model because I was told that that was what was best for patients. But I had a lot of, I think, concerns mounting in the back of my mind about some of the other things I was seeing with these patients and their families. So a lot changed for me in 2020 when I learned about detransitioners, because prior to that, I had not been taught that there were people who had any regrets or medical, even complications, as a result of so-called gender affirming care. I was sort of taught that it was this universal good. And I think what sets me and some other therapists apart from, I think where the divide really is in our field is how people react to learning that there is harm. You know, for me, my compulsion when I first heard about detransitioners is I have to learn everything I can about this.
Yeah.
And I need to really slow down what I'm doing until I have more information. I think, some of us on the more so-called gender critical side feel disappointed in our colleagues for not having that same reaction, for shutting out that new information, for being closed to
Hmm.
people's pain and suffering in that way. So a lot happened for me in 2020 and 2021. And then I started blogging, and then I started a podcast, and then one thing led to another. And now I'm not even doing therapy anymore.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have predicted. I don't know. I thought I was going to be a therapist forever. And even when I started a podcast, I don't think I could have fully anticipated how much that would change the trajectory of my career, the ethical dilemmas that would bring up, because now my opinions are out there for people, and the ethical dilemmas I would encounter when confronting this landscape of the divide over so-called gender affirming care. But because I sort of developed a name and reputation for my concern around these gender issues, I started attracting concerned parents from all over the world reaching out to me, just desperate to hear from the handful of professionals who are speaking out against this. Because these parents, as the parents of the trans identified youth, they've been gaslit by the medical and mental health fields. And they've been through some really painful processes. So after hearing from so many of these families, I eventually sort of pivoted with my career. For a while, I was doing a lot of different things at once, but for most of this year that we're talking in 2024, most of this year, I've just been doing consulting with these parents, because I realized at one point they're not looking for therapy. They're looking for guidance. They
Mm.
need to understand what's going on. They need to understand the psychology of this stuff. And so let me just kind of pivot and take the expertise that I've developed through working in the field all this time and use it to create educational resources. So I started doing more like educational consultation with these parents, and that's what led to me eventually developing a course. So now the main thing that I do is I have this program for parents called ROGD Repair. So that stands for Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria Repair. And it's really about the psychology of how these gender issues present in people and the factors around that. And then advice for parents on how to communicate with their kids. And that's the main thing I'm doing now.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. And before we go any further, I want everybody to know that to learn more about Stephanie's ROGD repair, just head over to my website. There's a link in the show notes, and you can use the code Lisa and get, I think it's 20% off your first month. Is that
It's
right?
actually 50%
50.
off your first month.
Yeah, 50% off your first month. So, um, while this program or this course is for parents, I imagine therapists would learn a ton as well if they just wanted to.
Yeah, and I have had some therapists take a look at the program, and those populations overlap, by the way.
Yeah.
I've
Oh, yeah.
had people come to me for consulting who are therapists
Mhm.
whose own children have gender issues.
Interesting. Oh, okay. Yeah. So the protective factor of having a parent who's a therapist, maybe not, maybe not so. It probably affects all different walks of life. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
mhm,
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with people who were, very highly educated and wealthy doctors, lawyers, scientists.
mhm,
I've worked with people who are extremely emotionally intelligent and excellent parents. I've worked with people who are struggling financially but still felt it was important to get their family these resources, as well as first generation immigrants. That this is rumored to be something primarily affecting white middle class families, because they're I my model is the trifecta of social
mhm.
contagion, and there's a social justice component to that. And so for a lot of white families, it's this sort of white guilt that they need to find some oppressed category to opt into. But that being said, I've worked with a lot of first generation immigrant families from all over the world, and it's, I think, extra hard for them because there's a linguistic barrier and a cultural barrier. I mean, there's so much just basic cultural stuff
Yeah.
that if an immigrant family has to learn to make their way in a new culture, and then add to that this gender ideology, and it's such a foreign landscape for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder, is there one, and I'm such a, I don't even know if you're going to laugh at me, but is there like a commonality factor that you could kind of string through, or is it the trifecta? You really feel like it's the trifecta that's, you have to look at all
Hmm.
three.
There are a lot of commonalities, and if there weren't commonalities, I wouldn't have been able to build a course because
True.
everything would be so individualized. I can identify and speak to those common themes in terms of family communication dynamics. But let's start with the trifecta because that's, I think, an easier concept to understand and should intuitively resonate for anyone who's begun to encounter these issues. So the approach that I take to understanding gender ideology is that it's not just one thing, but it's kind of three things working in tandem to form the perfect storm. It's gender identity ideology, which is the pseudo-religious belief that it's possible for a person to be born in the wrong body, or to have a male brain in a female body, or for a human being to be anything other than male or female. There's that ideology. And then it works in tandem with particular beliefs about social justice, which we can call woke, and cluster B personality traits. That's not to say that we're diagnosing these people with a cluster B personality disorder, but we're looking at the social contagion, right? What is it that's spreading? What is it that's becoming popularized? And its traits and behaviors of cluster B personality disorders, the emotional lability, the attention seeking, threats of self-harm, grandiosity, entitlement, right? We see these behaviors catching fire
Right.
through, social media, and it's all fueling gender identity ideology because then the entitlement, for instance, fuels the give me this or else, and some of the dysfunctional family dynamics that occur in these families as
Mhm.
well.
Right. Oh yeah. I'm as you were saying each piece, I was thinking of examples like in my head, like, well, yeah, so if a teen is showing entitlement or grandiosity and then they believe in the social contagion, and then, it's like you can almost kind of see it coming together as like a perfect storm. It's really, really something else. So your course is geared towards parents. So that's, I mean, I just think it's so amazing what you're doing helping parents. I love that. I'm so grateful you're doing this program. What, so we're, how can, I guess what I'd like for you to share is, therapists listening today, you might have a parent of a gender distressed child that you're working with. So how can therapists, what would you say, what are some ideas or tips that you can give therapists for them to help these parents?
Yeah, great question. So let me start relationally because that's always kind of my foundation. Just thinking about transference and countertransference and, what's occurring in the room or the virtual room, so to speak. And one thing I think is important context for your therapeutic relationship is that it's a miracle this person isn't in your office because many of these parents have been so gaslit and harmed by our profession. They've lost so much trust and respect because oftentimes it was our peers,
Mm.
and maybe even someone listening to this right now who's furious at you for having me on, who holds a completely different perspective. There could be therapists in your audience who
Right.
think of me as a transphobic right-wing bigot. I've been called that before.
Oh,
You
wow.
know, but it's those therapists who are so convinced that they are on the right side of history, that they're doing the right thing, that this exists, that there are these children who know who they are, unlike the rest of us, right? Us quote unquote cis people, we don't know who we are when we're
Right.
12. These kids do.
Right.
And that so-called gender affirming care saves lives. Now we know that that's the opposite of the truth. We know that so-called gender affirming care harms lives, that it shortens lives, that it increases all-cause mortality, including from everything from suicide after these interventions to cancer,
Hmm.
right? So we know that this stuff is bad for people, but these parents have been so gaslit. They they have many of them been through situations where therapists have driven a wedge between them and their children. Therapists have colluded and triangulated, and they've made again, the cluster B traits, they've made them worse because what young person doesn't have a couple cluster B traits, right? It's
Right.
just, it's a maturity thing.
Right. Yeah.
Ideally, life and the world around you responds to you in a way that helps you
Hmm.
mature out of it. But what happens when a therapist is colluding with the child and triangulating them against their parents? So, first and foremost, it's a miracle that this person is here taking a chance on you if they've been through all that. Now, they may not have. I've also talked to parents who have what I would consider very reasonable expectations of what a mental health professional should be doing, except unfortunately, those reasonable expectations are naive and inaccurate because these parents aren't aware of sort of where we've gotten to as a field. So they, need that information. So you might be talking to someone who still has trust in the profession, in which case that's great, but you might need to, if you're on my side of this, at least I'm not going to speak for Lisa, but if you're on the side of believing that it's best for these young people to be protected and not engage in identity foreclosure and not medicalize their distress, if that's what you believe, then you might be in a position where you might need to help parents understand the landscape of the mental health field right now, and that unfortunately their expectations can't necessarily be met, that you have to screen people pretty carefully. So that's, I think, point number one. Maybe I'll pause there to let you comment.
Oh no, I'm with you. I'm definitely with you. I'm I'm with Stephanie. Come out and say it. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I from the get-go have been like, you don't put children on hormones. You just don't do it. Like I mean, even before all this came out with how it is shown to cause all these problems later in life, I was like, that just doesn't make sense. These are hormones. You don't put children who haven't gone through puberty yet on hormones. It just doesn't, like, I don't get it. I don't, that's no, that's a big hard no for me. Yeah,
I guess I should probably also say that because of the nature of the trajectory that my career has taken, becoming, kind of infamous, if you will, uh, people who seek me out are already mostly of a certain opinion on
sure.
this. And whereas you, the person listening in the audience right now, who might not have a certain stance on this, or certainly not a public profile having a stance on this, you might be sought out by parents with different
Yeah.
opinions on this, right? So it's important to kind of carefully get a read on where your client is at, understanding that there might be layers to it. So, for example, I have I have numerous friends who are therapists who don't have any kind of public profile as having an opinion on this issue, but who quietly share my concerns. And I have nothing but respect for them because it's so hard to work in
Yeah.
the mental health field right now with the expectations that people have going into therapy. And I got a text from a therapist friend the other day, sort of like, what do I do? I have this new patient who's a parent who is medicalizing their kid, who seems to be projecting onto me that I must think this is wonderful too. What do I do with this? And
Right.
I haven't
Yeah.
had a chance to talk to my friend yet, except to say, I don't know, that sounds really hard.
Hmm.
But I'm imagining, not knowing any details, I'm imagining there could be a lot of layers to a situation like that because you just don't know what that patient's trajectory has been over time with how their thinking has evolved on this
Yeah.
issue. How much, I talked about the gaslighting earlier, right? Like how much gaslighting from medical professionals or for the media has gone on. Did they ever have any reservations? Did that parent sort of gaslight themselves, if you will, into seeing their child a certain way? Because I have talked to people who have been saying they when referring to their son or daughter for many years. And even when they're talking to me, they still say they, not because they see their child as something other than male or female, but just because they have learned to keep the peace, walking on eggshells, trying to convince themselves to see their kid a certain way that they don't. Right.
Mm.
And so even when they're talking to me and I'm like, I understand that you have a son or that you have a daughter and that you've been walking on eggshells around this person, it's okay when you're talking to me to see them as they are. And there are a lot of sort of psychological defenses for the parents that can be wrapped up in this. Like, I remember talking to a parent once who had gotten so accustomed to treating their child as a they. And when I inquired, how does it make you feel to just call her her? That's when the emotion really came out. Like she felt kind of numb and distant until she started speaking that way. And that's when it's like, oh my goodness, like I sense the vulnerability of this child, right? That there's actually, just because someone is caught up in this doesn't make them any less male or female than any of us. And I know there's going to be people with differing opinions who listen to this show who are very angry at me and you for holding this opinion, but I think it's coming from a place of tremendous compassion to recognize that, yeah, no matter how much your child rejects gender stereotypes or dresses and presents a certain way, no matter what their interests or appearance or mannerisms are, that could have been me, that could have been you, that could have been any of us when we were that age, if we were in a cultural environment that said that this is a possibility, that said that it's possible that you actually are masculine on the inside, and that therefore you should try to make your body match that through all these medications, right? Like
Yeah.
that any of us, I think if anything, there's like a failure of empathy on the part of people who believe in this stuff to just see that these are ordinary boys and girls,
Mhm.
but they're in a cultural milieu that makes it possible to believe this. And then we have to look at the secondary gain factors, right? So I know I'm talking to my fellow therapists here, right? There's secondary gain. There's issues of, whether the child's gender dysphoria is egosyntonic or egodystonic.
Mhm.
And I address all this stuff in the course. I basically take these psychological concepts like secondary gain and ego dystonic and like break them down for parents to try to understand how it applies to understanding their kid.
Yeah. Yeah, great. I mean, this is so helpful and you're giving me lots to think about as well. I or what other tips or advice would you give to therapists? I mean, I think the example you gave of your therapist friend who's going through this, it's like my first thought is what brought that parent into therapy? What brings them in? What's the goal of therapy? So, that's probably where I would get overwhelmed with that too. Like, whoa, what's going on here? This is wild. But I guess I would go to like, why is this person coming into therapy? And then once you kind of make those treatment goals or start to, develop the rapport, then I think you can start having that conversation of what you're noticing when the parent talks about the child and how does that make you feel and how did you get to this acceptance or how did you come, I think that can all come. So um that's just wow. Whew. I mean, that's a lot. So yeah, I kind of went on a different path there, but what else can you share with therapists out there that would be helpful?
Well, I'll preface this by saying that I chose a particular path with my career that's pretty unconventional, which is to pause on doing therapy and just focus on consultation and education for now. And it's different if you're staying in your lane as a therapist, keeping that therapist hat on because you have to know your limits. And if you are like me in the sense that parents know that you're a safe person to share their concerns with, that you're not going to call them a bigot for having these concerns,
Yeah.
then the people coming to you might be desperate for advice.
Hmm.
In which case, you really are going to have to watch out for your own sort of countertransference issues
Sure.
as a therapist and understand how to stay in your lane and what are the pros and cons
Hmm.
of just keeping your focus to the fact that the parent is your patient and not the family or not the kid, and that you can't ultimately tell them how to change their kid, right? So I will say in terms of the mental health issues of the parents, I've seen, a huge range from people who have exceptional emotional stability and emotional intelligence, people who I'm just like, you are a model human being and I adore how you are handling this crisis. I've seen the range from, and maybe those people, since they're coming to me specifically for educational guidance, maybe they wouldn't be the people to show up in therapy. Because if you're showing up in therapy, you some part of you realizes you need emotional help, right? But I've seen people super frazzled, super burnt out. I've seen people with a lot of despair. And so some of the stuff in my course is like sort of basic, like mental health, like self-care and emotional hygiene stuff for the parents about finding your own emotional stability because people lose sleep over this, their marriages become fraught over this. They quit their job to
Mhm.
focus on this. They move their family across the country or even out of the country to focus on this. People's lives are in upheaval when they sense that their child's entire future is on the line. And so you might be in a position where you are a sounding board for your patient who's considering making some really major life changes. And of course, none of us can know, and it's not your job to try to tell the patient what the best outcome is for them, but you might have to sort of help them weigh various competing factors, including, their own sanity and stability and how much they can control. I think a person's faith might play a role. For some families, it's like remembering what is and isn't theirs to control, and praying
Mhm.
can be helpful. Um, I've had to, give a lot of self-care reminders to these parents. So, asking them about how they're doing because and this is one of those things that extends beyond just this particular issue because if you've been a therapist who's worked with, parents of young children, parents of disabled children, parents of children going through any issue, you know how easy it is for parents to forget themselves,
Sure.
forget to sleep, forget to eat, right? So a lot of it's like getting back to self-care and what brings them joy. And paradoxically, that for many families is actually part of how they can restore their relationship with their kid who they're worried about and set a good example. In fact, I've noticed some interesting correlations where, like, for example, and I know this might be triggering for some people to hear, and I'm sorry if this upsets you, but it's common for women to have babies at later ages than the historical precedent, and there's reproductive technologies that make that possible. There's socioeconomic factors that press families in that direction. And so one of the ripple effects of this pattern is that it's nowadays common for teenage girls to be going through menarche or the onset of menstruation at the same time as their mothers are going through menopause or the end of menstruation. And so both mom and daughter are going through these hormonal fluctuations that are affecting their emotional stability. And, I myself, my mother was a lot older than me. She had me at a late age. And so one thing that brought up was a lack of female role models who were showing me different versions of womanhood. So at the age that a girl is sort of coming of age, entering womanhood, which is when these girls are so vulnerable to the messaging that, you hate your body, well, that makes you trans, right? At that age, what are a girl's examples of what womanhood, her future as a woman could look like? Because if her only example is her mom who's going through menopause and happens to be like,
Mm.
a raw nerve, especially if that mom is also burdened with like caretaking an elderly disabled parent, or she's got three other kids, or, sometimes women in that phase of life are just handling so much. And I think it's easy to forget as a mom how important you are to your kids in the sense of not just that they need you to take care of them, but that they are deeply emotionally attached to you and they need to see you well. And if they don't see you well, if your daughter who's becoming a woman is seeing you just frazzled, hating your life, then on some level, that girl's going to internalize that as womanhood sucks. And then if your husband's disrespecting you, if it seems like your role in the family is less than, then your daughter could be internalizing all of that as like it sucks to be a woman, right? And so I do, and I know this could be really triggering for some people to hear, but they might also be hearing truth in it. Like,
Mhm.
what example are you setting? And what example is your spouse setting and your family
Yeah.
dynamics of what it is to be a man or a woman? And how is your kid going to be squaring that with their, beliefs about social justice and what they've internalized from the media? So I'm not saying it should fall all on the mom. I'm not trying to blame the mom and say, see, it's your fault. You're going through
Yeah.
menopause. You should stop going through menopause. Like, no,
Right.
take care of yourself because if, your daughter looks up to you and she needs to see that womanhood is not just doing for other people all the time and burning yourself out? Also, does she have any older sisters, cousins, aunts, like other women that show other parts of what womanhood is like? You know, for me as a girl, it would have been my cool cousin who's like 15 years older than me, who, you know, I got to grow up seeing her going to art school and seeing her dating guys and having her cool apartment. And I needed that example
Sure.
of my cousin because it's like, that's what womanhood could be. It's not just my mom who's running herself ragged. It's also all of these other things.
Yeah.
So that's, sorry, I'm on a tangent about role
No,
models.
no, I think that's, I mean, I'm right there with you. I'm a mom. And I have two daughters, teenagers, and I mean, I could give you so many examples. And I had my first daughter at 35, so I was considered advanced maternal age. So I am going through the perimenopause stuff while my daughters are going through becoming young women. And I think back to when I was their age and my mom was going through it. And I'm like, I'm like, the way that I think about things is, and not to like bash my mom or whatever. I mean, I could do a whole episode on me and how I got here, my therapy and blah, 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 how it molded me into the person I am today and why I became a therapist, yada, yada. And I do talk about that here and there in other episodes. But what's my point? My point is, if I recall how my mom was back then and I didn't like it, or I just didn't want to see it, or it brought stuff up in me. My way of doing things nowadays is I just say do the opposite. Like flip it, do the opposite. Okay, my mom was maybe this way, I'm going to be this way. And I'm going to be the mom that I needed to be when I was that age to my girls. And let's just see how that works. And so a couple examples that I can share, because I think this is important. I think this would might be helpful for some, is I don't have a scale in the house. We don't have a scale. I never weigh myself. I never talk about weight. I never talk about anything like that. Never, don't put any value on the number on the scale. We don't have, we have one bathroom in this house. We have to learn how to share the space in the bathroom so we're not taking up too much time primping and preparing ourselves. I mean, my girls, everybody wants to look nice and look presentable, but we don't spend a whole lot of time on looking just right. It's just my two things are hygiene, take a shower, wash your hair every couple days, and wash your face and brush your teeth. And if you want to add a little bit of makeup on, that's great. But I don't wear a ton of makeup. And part of that is my husband has said, you don't need a ton of makeup. You look beautiful as it is. So, like these messages that I receive or I have received, it's like, I want to pass them on to our girls and I want them to, I mean, there's so many things I want them to know, but I think what I'm saying is what you're saying is so spot on is how, how are we as mothers and as partners in a relationship or marriage? How are we showing up? How are we treating each other? What are we role modeling to our children? Because we are their best and most important role models. And I can say that because I didn't have the best role models growing up. Not that, just my parents got divorced when I was young. My dad, like, oh, that's a whole thing. So the way that I was raised, or what my idea of what fathers do, oh my gosh, I was so screwed up until my mid 20s, like so screwed up. And so anyway, I guess I just want to get back to what you're talking about because I think this is a really important conversation. And to me, this is just like therapists having a conversation. I'm blown away why it's so controversial and why what you're sharing is so targeted. Maybe that's because you've been doing this for a while. You've taken so much heat. I mean, I've heard you talk about on your episodes how you have gotten attacked, and I just feel you're doing such great work that as therapists, I feel like we have to see the different sides. We have to look at it from all the different perspectives, and we have to educate ourselves on the repercussions of this, quote unquote medication or affirmation model. It's I don't know, Stephanie. For me, it just makes sense. Like I have to look at it from the different angles. I can't be captured. I don't know what it is about me, but I just like objective truth, objective reality makes sense. I can't get into it. Like I just can't.
Yeah, I
Why?
mean,
They
I
can't
think
capture me. What is it?
we have that instinct as therapists to turn
Yeah.
over every stone, right? And there are people who are going to hate what I have to say, even on the gender critical side of things, because they hear it as blaming the parents. And I'm not blaming the
Oh, yeah.
parents. This
No.
couldn't exist without a
Yeah.
corrupt medical system that that changes the role of doctors from doing no harm to doing whatever the
Right.
customer wants,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
Like that's the problem. And the trifecta of social contagion is the problem. But as a therapist, you learn to help your patient control what is within their ability to
Right.
control, right?
Right.
And so I'm speaking to the therapists who are sitting with that mom, not sitting with her daughter,
Hmm.
not sitting with her husband, but sitting with that mom who's coming to therapy, who's taking a chance on trusting one of us as professionals. And you can do her a tremendous service by simultaneously validating her concerns, not being one of these therapists who's going to gaslight and call her a
Right.
bigot and tell her to get with the program and tell her to see her daughter as her son,
Yeah.
but at the same time holding up a mirror to like, how are you doing?
Right.
Like,
Right.
and what is within your ability to control? And it's so scary to let go of trying to control. And I'm not saying that that's always the right thing. Sometimes
Right.
you got to fight for dear life. And
Right.
that's why my program exists is to help people understand how to fight for your kid.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it could be that there's this tightrope walk balance that by, simultaneously controlling some things while radically letting go of others and trusting that on some level that you being the best version of yourself somehow, even while grieving or terrified for your kid's future, that like being the best version of yourself, taking better care of yourself, and surrendering amidst the struggle can also be the way through for your own
Right.
sanity as well as potentially for your kid as well. And
Yeah.
so many of the techniques that I teach in the course are really about emotional intelligence and communication skills and finding a way somehow, I'm not saying it's easy, to relax enough in the center of the storm that you're even present in the moment with your kid when they need you. Because another thing that happens to these parents is they get so caught up in their activism. And activism can be a wonderful outlet for people. It can be a source of community and guidance and inspiration and support, but can also bring people down.
Mm.
And I've had so many families come to me where I'm seeing a lot of indicators of hope in their family, where I'm seeing a lot of strengths. I'm seeing strengths in the family. I'm seeing signs of ambivalence and doubt in the kid, which is one of the things I teach parents to look for. But those families are comparing themselves to these worst case scenarios they've heard on the internet. And I, as someone who works behind the scenes, who talks individually to all these families, I'm like, I'm pretty sure, I can't say with absolute certainty, but I'm pretty sure that that worst case scenario you've heard, that family, they have a different constellation of factors
Yeah.
than yours. They have risk factors that you don't have. They lack some of the protective factors you have. So hearing other people's
Yeah.
stories can become overwhelming and hopeless. That's why I have certain kind of ground rules in the forums of my course, because we do have discussion forums, but it's like, the discussion forums, actually the whole course, nothing in this course is a substitute for your own personal therapy. And so I had a parent recently like posting their despair in the
Mm.
forums and saying they're having a hard time doing the course because of their despair. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I really want you to go to the right places for that. And I know the despair is contagious and it's so hard because everyone here is already fighting off their own despair. And I just don't want that
Right.
to spread. It's like hard to send that message without sounding kind of cold, like your despair is not welcome here. No, it's like I want you to go to the place
Right.
that can actually hold that. And hopefully that is a therapist, maybe a listener of your show
Right.
is that therapist who's the right support for that person.
Right. I think, yeah, I love how you said that. And I just want to go back to also give a disclaimer that I am not perfect by any means and that I screw things up all the time with my kids. In fact, if my oldest was here, she would be nodding her head and saying, yes, that I can butcher things all the time as a parent. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm not blaming, I would never blame parents for any of this because like you said, it's the medical profession has really done us so wrong in this whole affirming everything. And then social media and the internet. I want my kids to be able to get on the internet, but it's not like a free for all. So how do there's so many things and everything is so nuanced that, like you said, I mean, it's stories are helpful, but they can also be hurtful. And too many stories can become almost overwhelming. And you start to lose sight of what really matters and how you can really help yourself help your children. So I'm so glad that you said that. And I just don't want people to think that I think that I'm perfect, because I'm not. I would never say
No, I know
that.
it's so crazy how people go there too, because to me, when I give advice and
Mm,
I talk about issues affecting other people in a way that they end up feeling judged.
yeah.
And I'm like, in the reaction where people feel judged by something I said that wasn't even about them, that was just about like
Yeah.
parents in general or something. I'm like, I'm reading into, I'm like, oh, they think I'm perfect. No, like to me, that's
Yeah.
like never
Right.
like I'm a step parent. The odds are already stacked against me in terms of attachment dynamics.
Yeah.
Like
Right. Right.
step parenting is like oftentimes feels like a no-win situation. So like, far be it for me to,
Yeah.
criticize anyone. I'm just trying to help because I understand the human condition is inherently challenging.
Yes. Yes, for sure. Yes, step parenting is tough. Gosh. Ooh. And I know it's interesting. You and I were talking some other time about how there's so much, there's so many CEU courses on gender and gender affirming care, but there's like nothing on step families. And
I
there's
know.
so many more step families out there than there are families that are dealing with the gender issue. It
Yeah,
blows my mind. I feel like this is like, and that's something, I mean, hey, I am wide open to doing a CE course on step family. So if anybody out there wants to do probably do really well with something like that, because how many people come to therapy because they're blending families?
seriously. So, I mean, I tried to crunch some numbers using AI once just to get like a ballpark, and it was
Mm,
hard to find the right figures, but I was like trying to figure out of all the adults and all the children in the country, like how many people are in some kind of blended family situation in one capacity or another.
yeah.
And like I think it was about a third of Americans.
Yeah.
And then if you look at the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapists, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Mhm.
So the AAMFT should be the go-to for issues of marriage and family therapy. There's a transgender resources section on their drop-down menu. There's no blended family resources. It's like, yeah, I
Mm-hmm. No, I get it.
we've
Mm-hmm.
we've really lost our way as a field. Like we forgot what our
Mm-hmm.
telos is, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is the ultimate goal of the profession of marriage and family therapy should be helping marriages and families, right? But this ideology is so destructive of the family. It gives all the power to the kid
Mm-hmm.
to make life-altering decisions. And then when that person regrets it, they have to live with that burden on their heart of I did this to myself. No matter how much people like me come along and say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. It's not your fault. You shouldn't have been allowed to make that decision. It's the doctor's fault. Still like I talk to so many detransitioners and follow them. I've been following detransitioners for years now in their journeys, and they still live with that shame
Mm-hmm.
of feeling like they did this to themselves.
Sure. Yeah. I bet, because they were ultimately given the power to make that choice, and all the adults around them said, okay, okay, sure. And then they're over here going, why didn't the adults speak up? Why didn't the adults say something? Why didn't they tell me that this is what is possible with these medications? Yeah. It's heartbreaking. I mean, it really is. And um, I'm so glad that you have created this course and you have your podcast, and share it with everybody a little bit about your podcast, because they may not know.
Sure. Well, my podcast is called You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist, and it's available everywhere podcasts are. I've been doing it since May 2022. We're currently 130 something episodes in. It's a weekly, mostly long form interview show. Occasionally, I'll do a shorter or a solo episode. Um, and when I don't know when I started, the name came to me like because it was something I heard a lot at, just social events. Oh, you must be some kind of therapist, right? So, and it's also kind of like a Rorschach test because
Mm,
what associations do you have with therapists? Or you're like, oh, you must be some kind of therapist, or is it like,
yeah.
oh, you must be some kind of therapist, or like
Right.
it could go in any number of ways, which I think itself is interesting. And but really the podcast has sort of evolved into a commentary on the state of the field. I feel like it's some way it's like a podcast that tracks the downfall of the counseling profession. I talk to people harmed by the counseling profession. I talk to people who are exiting the counseling
Yeah.
profession. I talk to people critical of the profession in many ways, from detransitioners and parents, and concerned colleagues and doctors and anyone with an interesting perspective. I also have like a few sort of anti-psychiatry or psychiatry skeptical episodes, so it's an interesting mix.
It is. I really enjoy your podcast. I don't even know how I found you, but I remember listening to a few of your episodes. And one day I was like, I'm just going to reach out to Stephanie and see if she's interested in coming on my podcast. You,
I'm so glad you did.
yeah, yeah, me too. I'm just so grateful that we connected and that you've entered my world. I have a question that just kind of hit me, and I don't know what prompted this thought, but if you were to leave the therapy profession and do something different, what would you do?
Well, I'm already doing it.
Yeah.
Because like right now, I mean, I haven't seen patients since March, so it's been like 9 months,
Hmm.
maybe, since I've actually seen patients. And at first it was a leap of faith, but I had to do it because I was so sick. I have a chronic illness and it was at its worst point at that point, and I had to pare back because I was just doing so many different things between the podcast, therapy, consulting,
Yeah.
blogging, networking, representing a film. I just doing so many things, and I decided, you know, therapy is something I can pause on because I do have these other things that are sources of income, and therapy feels like something where I really need to be fully present and take that role very seriously.
Sure.
And here's the thing that we don't talk about very often in such a frank way. But as a therapist, your job is suicide prevention. It's always suicide prevention. You can never know, even if you specialize in something that seems pretty far removed from that level of acuity, you really just never know. You should always be in a position where you are ready to handle suicidal ideation, period. And I think after 10 years of that responsibility, I needed a break from feeling personally directly responsible or feeling like I might be in a position where I could at any moment be directly responsible for someone with suicidal ideation. I think for my chronic health issues that I needed that stressor removed from my life. I'm still, of course, providing educational consultation to people who may be worried about suicide. And so I always make sure, that they know the limits of the scope of what I'm doing and where to turn and to make sure that their loved one has
Mm.
the appropriate support. But so I'm doing this educational guidance and consultation. So I have the course, and then I also help people one-on-one strategize. I mean, this is the thing. As therapists, you're not supposed to give advice, right? You serve as a sounding board. You help people weigh their decisions in the context of their own values. I know you did a great episode on values, right?
Mm.
And your guest had really clear boundaries in terms of we need to understand our own values. We need to have the maturity and the insight as therapists to be able to see when we have some lack of integrity in our own values, where maybe we think of ourselves as having one set of values, but if you look at our actions, they reveal that we're guided by a different set of values.
Hmm.
The role of the therapist is not to impose their values on their client, but to support the client making their own choices in light of their values.
Right.
I think it's easier said than done, though, in a time of so many, like such normlessness in society where it's so much like anything goes. And, unfortunately, we can't separate the issue of gender ideology from like the normalization of like furries and kinks and all, and like basically child predator. I mean, I have some inside information on how much gender ideology is wrapped up with furries, anime, like conventions where children are preyed upon by adults with kinks and fetishes. There's some really dark stuff going on there. And so in the society where there's kind of this like anything goes ethos, and there's no like boundaries or north that we're all aiming for, I think it makes it increasingly difficult for therapists to figure out where the limits of their scope of practice are and how to stay in their lane. And, to bring it back to that example of like my friend having a patient who's expecting her to share her belief that she's doing the right thing by medicalizing her kid. What should my friend's job be in this
Right.
situation? Should
Right.
it be to provide that parent with better information on the harms of what she's setting up her kid for? In the process, is she potentially putting herself at risk? And, maybe she's going to anger the patient if she does that. Maybe the patient will file a complaint. Doesn't mean my friend didn't do the right thing if she did that. But
Right.
maybe she needs to, again, operate within the scope of what is the patient's values framework. But if the patient's values framework is that she's doing something good to her kid by robbing them of their future sexual functioning, can my friend really get on board with that, or is there a limit there? So sorry, I'm like going on this whole
Yeah,
philosophical.
no. No, I mean it I totally see where you're coming from, and I agree with you. It can be, yeah, I mean I think it kind of goes back to, like you said, there's no true north here. There's no like the moral compass. There's no moral compass in they've because they want to say that they, and I don't know, they, me, not me, others want to say that, this is a secular profession that we're in, but at the same time, it's like we have to know the truth. We have to know what the objective truths are, and we have to know the difference between right and wrong. But if we're there to meet the client or patient where they're at, and this is where they're at, what do and we know that this could be harming their child. You're right. I mean, it's tough. It is so tough. And how do we fit into that? And because some therapists say, like, I just don't work with gender distress. I don't cover it. That's not my area of expertise. But you might have a parent walk in your door that's not there for gender affirming care, but has this issue in their family. And yeah, I mean, whew,
Well, and
yeah. Mm-hmm.
you never know when it's going to crop up. And the problem with, because it's mostly the people in my experience, I don't know about you, Lisa, but the
Mm-hmm.
people in my experience who say that are the people who know that there's something wrong with it, but they don't want to sacrifice their career to do what I've done, you
Yeah.
know? So they're just like, I'm just going to stay out of it. But it's unfortunate because although I understand where they're coming from, and in a different life, maybe I would have chosen that path, that can be viewed as a form of cowardice. And unfortunately, the situation that it creates is one where the only therapists that will see these patients
Mm.
are the ones that will push them further down that path.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. And you're very brave for doing what you're doing. And I mean, you're very brave and very courageous.
I don't know if I knew what I was getting myself into. Things just kind of happened one step at a
Mm-hmm.
time. And, now I look
Mm-hmm.
back and I'm like, well, I don't know if and when I return to therapy, now that I'm a public figure, and because by the end there, I was like, do I need to have it in my informed consent that, like, by the way, you're seeing a therapist who has this public presence. You might come across my work on the internet. You are under no obligation as my patient to familiarize yourself with my podcast or my blog or anything like that. I have zero expectation of that. However, you might want to know for your own sake to make sure that this is a fit,
Right.
what it is that my stance is. And the thing is, like, even if a patient chose me knowing what my stance is on various issues, that does not that does not mean that there won't be countertrans or excuse me, that there won't be transference issues because that patient might then maybe it's a patient who shares gender critical beliefs and wants to see me because I'm gender critical, but then they also have beliefs that differ from me on some other issue, and when they come across me having something to say publicly on that other issue, like surrogacy or
Mm.
anything else, the moment they're disappointed in me, that's a transference issue no matter what. Like, so
Yeah.
I don't know how you do it, Lisa. I don't know
Yeah.
how to square being a therapist and being a public figure. And I didn't know how much this would become an issue until I was in it. I had the inspiration to start a
Yeah.
podcast. I had no idea how big it would grow or what direction it would take my life in. I don't know. And more broadly, in an age of social media and everyone having a blog, like how are we redefining the role of therapists in the 21st century, given that a lot of people who work in this role have some kind of digital footprint where
Mm.
some of their beliefs or preferences can be identified.
Yeah. Yeah. You asked some really, really good questions, and I wish I had answers. I don't. I mean, like you, I started my podcast and I was like, oh, I'm going to help therapists earn continuing education on the go. And it's evolved into more than that. In fact, I guess this is a good time to announce, I wasn't planning on doing this, but I am starting another podcast. And that podcast is going to be called Just Therapy, mental health, family. I have this whole extender to it, but pretty much is going to be a client-facing podcast for people who have traditional and or conservative values. Because of a lot of what we talked about today, so many clients, patients feel gaslit by our profession, and they don't know what they're going to get when they walk in a therapist's office. And everybody, it wants to talk about gender, and therapists are so caught up in all of this where real world problems are happening. People are dealing with all kinds of real world situations that have nothing to do with gender, but you're hard pressed to find information out there nowadays. I think people just want help with life on life's terms, as I call it. So I'm excited to start that podcast. I would love to have you back as a guest on that one too. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, you definitely asked some really great questions, things that I've kind of thought about, as I see clients or patients, but haven't really thought too much about, because maybe I don't necessarily see myself as a public figure. And I don't know why, because I don't know. I don't know why that feels different for me. There's no cut and dry rules for it, So like you said, we are really pioneering. So Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all about your program and about how you help parents. Is there anything else that you would like our listeners to know before we end the episode?
Well, just in case there's anyone who needs a little clarity, my program, ROGD Repair, the link will be in your show notes.
Mhm.
And like we mentioned at the beginning, your code, Lisa, gets people 50% off their first month. This is a program for the parents. So it's
Mhm.
not a program for the parents to put their kids through. And you as a therapist, as a listener, are welcome to join the program if you feel like you could learn something from it. You don't get CEs from doing this program, but if you feel like you could learn a thing or two about the gender issue and about how to help parents or families, you're welcome to check it out. And I do hope to work with Lisa in the future
Yeah.
on creating CEs specifically for therapists. So yeah, if you're a therapist and you have a family or a parent that you're working with who's struggling to figure out what to do about their kid who's on this path that could lead towards medical, permanent harm, this program is for that parent.
Awesome.
I will just say it's not for parents who think that affirmation and medicalization are a good thing. The goal of the program is not to change anyone's mind. The goal is to take people who already have concerns
Mhm.
and equip them with knowledge and resources.
Well, great. Well, all the links are in the show notes, you guys. I'll put the code Lisa, get 50% off your first month. Stephanie, thank you again for being here. This has been fantastic.
Thanks, Lisa. It's great to talk to you.
Please note that the therapy show with Lisa Mustard is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and not a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice. Always consult with your therapist, doctor, or physician before implementing any suggestions from the show. The Therapy Show with Lisa Mustard is edited and engineered by Chelsea Weaver. If you're looking to start a podcast or ready to take the editing off of your plate, be sure to visit chelseaweaverpodcasting.com.
Thank you for listening to You Must Be Some Kind of Therapist. If you enjoyed this episode, kindly take a moment to rate, review, share, or comment on it using your platform of choice. And of course, please remember, podcasts are not therapy, and I'm not your therapist. Special thanks to Joey Pecoraro for this awesome theme song, Half Awake, and to Pods by Nick for production. For help navigating the impact of the gender craze on your family, be sure to check out my program for parents, ROGD Repair. Any resource you heard mentioned on this show, plus how to get in touch with me, can all be found in the notes and links below. Rain or shine, I hope you will step outside to breathe the air today. In the words of Max Ehrmann, with all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world.